So yeah, let's just keep going here. Next off, we'll be looking at contract haulers. So just want to be clear for folks that these are entities who pick up material from a generator and then deliver that material either to out of state or to direct land application in state. Otherwise, you don't report to the department. You still need to provide required information to the receiving in-state facility, though. By definition, again, only reporting on outflows because the material was taken from a generator with respect to RDRS requirements. Meaning, so outflows, and that would be expressed in terms of tons of each stream sent to each in-state end user category by region, as well as tons of each stream sent to each out-of-state entity or region. So we'll talk about what's required for both in-state and out-of-state. So I'm sorry, the legend is very squished here, but we can talk about some of the requirements. So beginning sort of up at the top here, as I mentioned earlier, the only reporting that contract haulers will be doing to the department with respect to in-state hauling is in the case of when they're sending the material to direct land application. The de minimis threshold, I've covered this in previous workshops. The de minimis threshold for that is 50 tons per quarter of direct land application, above which registration and reporting would be required for those activities. So you would report the tons of material that was land applied, and folks can get a little bit tripped up about wet tons versus dry tons, and it's basically at the however much it weighed, wet or dry, at the time it was sold or transferred. So in that case, it would be probably as it was applied, the tons of the material as applied. So that's the information that contract haulers would need to keep track of, and they would aggregate the tonnage by end user category. Of course, that's limited to just land application, and as well as indicate the region. So for in-state, region is by county. So for each county for which material was land applied, they would the contract hauler would indicate how many tons were land applied in each county, and that's what they would report in RDRS. So that essentially is the only requirement for in-state contract hauling. The reason for that, and I've talked about this in prior workshops, is because the material is eventually going to be reported upon by the receiving facility that the contract hauler took that material to. So it's only the case that we're requiring contract haulers to report for in-state land application, because they're basically the final hands that touch it prior to it leaving the solid waste infrastructure. So they're the ones who basically have the most granular data with respect to how that material is used. So taking a look at out of state, and we'll sort of start at the top here, material sent to in-state or end users out of state, you're going to go ahead and report the tons, the material type, and then by end user category by region. So if you sent, let's say, 500 tons to an out-of-state inert debris fill operation, you would report 500 tons of whatever material type it is, let's say inerts, mixed inerts, if that is how it was sent to the inert debris fill end user category in Nevada, for instance. and that would be the extent of that flow. Now, if you also sent material for another end use to Nevada, you would need to indicate that category and how much you sent of that material. All right, so taking a look at the next one down, were disaster debris and designated waste. If you're disposing that material out of state, you would need to record basically the tons by material type. And the material type is basically, again, immutable. It's designated waste. It says so right there in the flow itself. So disaster debris as well, that's the extent of the reporting on material type. So in identifying the stream, you're also essentially identifying the material type. So even though that's technically a requirement, it's sort of implied within what the flow, as it's reported. All right, so yeah, that's fairly straightforward. I think the only thing I'll add to that is that designated waste and disaster debris are, you might have thought to yourself, oh, that where's the jurisdiction of origin for that material? Well, that's one of the things about RDRS is that we're no longer tracking the designated waste, requiring designated waste and disaster debris to be tracked by jurisdiction of origin. I think it had been the case in previous years that those tonnages were basically taken out of a jurisdiction's responsibility. So, there's, it was almost redundant to keep in the jurisdiction with respect to the designated and disaster. But if anyone has any further comments about that, we can talk about that or chat offline. So yeah, again, it's these two, designated waste and disaster debris, that's not going to affect the jurisdictional progress for folks who might have concerns about that. With respect to contract hauler sending recycling and composting outflow stream out of state, they are going to report the tons by material type and the region to which that was sent. So they wouldn't identify the end user category. You wouldn't be required to provide contact information, nothing like that. Non-green beneficial reuse material. Yeah, so just as kind of a preview, BRU, that's an abbreviation for beneficial reuse. So going forward, that's what it will be referred to. And I'll try to spell it out, any acronyms as well going forward. Non-green material potential beneficial reuse. Now that sounds like a mouthful, and it kind of is. It's basically material that has a potential to be applied at a landfill for as beneficial reuse as opposed to disposal. So there are many types of beneficial reuse material. Some, they in California, they're all subject to enforcement agency a prior approval, but we list in Title 27 some approved material types that can be used as beneficial reuse. So if you're a contract hauler and you're taking non-green beneficial reuse material out of state, you will indicate what kind of material it is, that you're sending it to an out-of-state landfill for beneficial reuse, and the tons of each of those materials, and as well as the RDRS number and contact information of the out-of-state disposal facility, so we can follow up if there's any questions about how that beneficial reuse material may have been applied at that facility, and also potentially to confirm the diversion credits or that sort of thing. So that's why we're requiring that information. It's necessary to verify many things, actually, with respect to RDRS. So green material beneficial reuse, you'll report the tons by jurisdiction of origin. And that means the place where the waste was initially generated. And you can do so in percentages and that sort of, or tonnages, and we'll talk later in the methods section about more about jurisdiction of origin and how to keep track of that. But essentially, yeah, because green material, but ADC is going to count as disposal per AB 1594 come Jan 1, 2020. We're requiring that outflows of green material for beneficial reuse, we want the jurisdiction of origin information to be preserved. So there's we can properly identify, the jurisdictions that apply ADC green material, so that can be accounted for with respect to, again, the diversion calculations or the jurisdictional progress, disposal rate calculations. And that's laid out in 18794.2 of Title 14 CCR. Okay, so the last one we'll talk about here is a contract hauled solid waste material sent out of state for disposal. So in addition to recording jurisdiction of origin information for that, because it's solid waste, you'll also record the source sector from which you took that material. So source sector would be expressed in terms of percent or tons of residential, single-family residential, multifamily residential / commercial, and finally self-hauled. So those would be the three categories. You would identify, the percentage of which the material was sent, and you would do that for each out-of-state solid waste facility to which material was sent. All right, so any questions from either in person or online with regard to contract haulers?
So we have a question from Kristen from Enviromine, and her question is, does out-of-state also include hauling to another country, for example, Mexico?
Yes, it does. So anytime you see out-of-state, you can also substitute that for out-of-country as well. In terms of reporting region, so as I mentioned before, if it's in California, it's by county. If it's out of state but still in the U.S., it would be by state. And then if it's outside of California altogether, the region you would indicate would be the country. That's pretty much it. So it would be, 500 tons of whatever material sent to, material consumer end user in Mexico, if that was the case. So hopefully that answers your question. Anything else? Okay. Yeah, tribal lands as well. Thank you, John. All right, we're doing pretty well, so we're just going to keep rolling.